Dark Shadows is an American Gothic soap opera that originally aired weekdays on the ABC television network, from June 27, 1966, to April 2, 1971. The series became hugely popular when vampire Barnabas Collins appeared a year into its run. Dark Shadows also featured werewolves, zombies, man-made monsters, witches, warlocks, time travel, and a parallel universe. A small company of actors each played many roles. Indeed, as actors came and went, some characters were played by more than one actor. Major writers included Art Wallace, Ron Sproat, Malcolm Marmorstein, Sam Hole and Gordon Russell. Dark Shadows was distinguished by its vividly melodramatic performances, atmospheric interiors, memorable storylines, numerous dramatic plot twists, unusually adventurous music score, and broad and epic cosmos of characters and heroic adventures. Now regarded as something of a classic, it continues to enjoy an intense cult following. Although the original series ran for only 5 years, its scheduling as a daily daytime drama allowed it to amass more single episodes during its run than most other science fiction fantasy genre series produced for English-language television, including Doctor Who and the entire Star Trek television franchise. In 2004 and 2007, Dark Shadows was ranked number 19 and number 23 on TV Guide's top cult shows ever. History: creator Dan Curtis claimed he had a dream in 1965 of a mysterious young woman, who was on a train. The following day Curtis told his wife of the dream and pitched the idea as a TV show to ABC. Network officials greenlit production and Curtis began hiring crew members. Art Wallace was hired to create a story from Curtis's dream sequence. Wallace wrote the story Bible Shadows on the Wall, the proposed title for the show, later changed to Dark Shadows. Robert Costello was added as a line producer, and Curtis took on the creator and executive producer roles. Lella Swift, John Sedgwick, and Henry Kaplan all agreed to be directors for the new series. Robert Cobbett created the musical score and S.Y. the Mashoff designed the set. Curtis then set out to find the actress to play the girl on the train. Alexandra Moltke, a young actress with little experience, was discovered and cast in the role of Victoria Winters, an orphan who ends up in the mysterious town of Collinsport, Maine, to unravel the mysteries of her past. Veteran film star Joan Bennett was soon cast as Victoria's employer Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, a woman who had not left her home in over 18 years. Stage actor Louis Edmonds was cast as Elizabeth's brother Roger Collins. Another stage actress, Nancy Barrett, was then cast as Elizabeth's headstrong daughter Carolyn Stoddard, and child actor David Hennessy was cast as Roger's troubled son David Collins. Dark Shadows had a rocky beginning. Critics were quick to deem the show rather boring for its heavy use of unknown actress Alexandra Moltke and the slow progression of the show's legacy. The earliest episodes consisted of introducing the troubled characters and did not show any of the supernatural elements that later made the show a hit. As production on the series continued, the introduction of many new and mysterious characters and various unknown actors and actresses was prevalent on the set. Most actors also ended up playing multiple characters, and those same characters would often come back from the dead in the unprecedented use of parallel times and flashbacks. Broadcast history: perhaps one of ABC's first truly popular daytime shows, along with the game show Let's Make a Deal, Dark Shadows found its demographic niche in teenagers coming home from school in time to watch the show at 4 p.m. Eastern/3 p.m. Central, where it aired for almost all of its network run, the exception being a 15-month stretch between April 1967 and July 1968, when it aired a half-hour earlier. Originally, it was aired in black and white, but the show went into color starting with the August 14, 1967 installment transmission. It became one of ABC's first daytime shows to actually win its time slot, leading to the demise of NBC's original Match Game and Art Linkletter's long-running House Party on CBS, both in 1969. The series reached its peak in popularity during a storyline set in the year 1897, broadcast from March 1969. By the end of May, Dark Shadows was ABC's most popular soap, and by late 1969 it was reaching nearly 20 million viewers. In November 1969, after 9 months of some of Dark Shadows' unregistered trademark most intricate, intelligent storylines, an end came to the adventures in 1897. Now the writers were faced with a dilemma, with ratings at an all-time high. What could they do next to hold the audience? Their decision, a storyline known as the Leviathans, proved to be a thematic misstep for the show and one from which it never recovered. Fans tended to dislike the portrayal of Barnabas as the pawn of some greater power. They proved to be more interested in the archetypes of classic horror, the vampire, the witch, the werewolf than in off-camera suggestion. The launch of Somerset in March 1970, a much ballyhooed spin-off of NBC's Another World, also hurt the series considerably. The release of the film House of Dark Shadows in September of that year is also thought to have caused TV ratings to fall, perhaps because of parents who attended the film with their children and, seeing the amount of blood spilled across the screen, discouraged their children's choice of television viewing material. Beginning in the fall of 1970, several ABC stations across the country dropped the show due to falling viewership. Within 6 months, ratings dropped from 7.3 to 5.3. Ironically, Nielsen ratings for March 1971, the last full month that Dark Shadows was on the air, revealed that viewership had risen in its final weeks. By early 1971, though, ABC was trying to cut costs in the face of harsh new economic realities including a national economic recession, a sharp dip in advertising revenue following the U.S. government's recent ban on cigarette commercials, and a record-high number of competing soap operas which were more expensive to produce than game or talk shows on the network's daytime schedules. Thus, the network began weeding out supposedly unproductive programming. Despite its relatively high station clearances for its time slot and low production costs, Dark Shadows fell victim to the purge mainly because of its young audience, who usually did not make decisions about the purchasing of household goods and food products for the family, which were the two chief industries that bought airtime on daytime television in that era. Practically no other daytime show skewed so much under the 18-35 demographic threshold as Dark Shadows did. Furthermore, primetime shows and movies with horror or science fiction themes had been on the decline for some time, and, of course, the serial appealed heavily to fanciers of those genres, people who usually didn't express much interest in the often sentimental domestic or romantic themes on which traditional soaps had relied since their inception on radio in the 1930s. In addition and probably more decisively, the program experienced a precipitous drop in its ratings during its last 2 years on the air, falling from a peak of 8.4 in the 1968-1969 television season to a 5.3 in 1970-1971. Reflecting on the series' cancellation, in an interview included in a 2005 DVD release, series creator Dan Curtis welcomed the show's cancellation, feeling it had run out of fresh ideas. "I was just hoping it was going to end. I couldn't unregistered trademark squeeze my brain any harder to come up with just one more story. I just wanted to move on and out despite many letters of protest from outraged fans." ABC cancelled the 5-year-old show on April 2, 1971, and replaced it with a new version of the hit 1960s game show Password. The rather abrupt ending of the series left some plot lines unfinished, though most of the plot threads came to a happy conclusion, via a voice-over explaining future events in the final minute of the last episode. The original cast reunited in 2003 for a special reunion play recorded for MPI, and in 2006 resumed production of Dark Shadows audio dramas for Big Finish. These dramas have been ongoing for 10 seasons. Preservation: Dark Shadows has the distinction of being one of the few classic television soap operas to have all of its episodes survive intact except one, although a handful of early episodes are available only in 16:1 Kindscope format. For the one lost episode, only a home audio recording exists. The home video version and cable reruns of this episode were reconstructed from a combination of this soundtrack, the closing scene from the episode number 1218, the opening scene from episode number 1220, and video still frames sourced from other episodes. Syndication and cable repeats: Dark Shadows was to be syndicated by ABC's distribution arm, ABC Films, as the series was ending in late 1970 and early 1971. However, delays kept the show from entering syndication, mainly because the FCC imposed financial interest and syndication rules, forcing the networks to sell off their syndication companies. Finally, in 1975, World Vision Enterprises released 130 episodes to syndication. Over the years, more episodes were released in varying quantities until the show finished its syndicated run in 1990. However, the first 209 shows and roughly the last year's worth of shows were never seen in syndication. Dark Shadows was lucky to be in reruns at all. Most daytime programs at the time were being destroyed in an effort to recycle the videotape, and those programs that survived were usually locked away without being seen again. For many years, the show was rerun on Sci-Fi, now known as Sci-Fi. Unlike previous networks, Sci-Fi had the entire run of 1,225 episodes to show. The network stopped airing Dark Shadows in December 2003, only 2 weeks short of completing the series. All 1,225 episodes in the series were shown at various times between 1992 and 2003. Episode numbering: a total of 1,225 episodes were produced, but during the course of its run, the show was preempted 20 times. ABC would compensate for this by occasionally skipping, double numbering and, in one case, triple numbering episodes in order to keep a show ending in a 5 or 0 airing on Fridays. This is why the last episode produced has number 1245 when in actuality it was only the 1,225th episode produced. Storylines: 1966/7, Victoria Winters' Parentage, Episode 1-92. Victoria Winters and her role as governess is inspired by title character in Charlotte Bronte unregistered trademark Gothic novel Jane Eyre. Burke Devlin's revenge for his manslaughter conviction, Episode 1-201. Burke Devlin and his motivation for returning is reminiscent of Alexander Dumas' unregistered trademark novel The Count of the Monte Cristo. Roger Collins's unregistered trademark Mysterious Car Crash, Episode 13-32. The Murder of Bill Malloy, Episode 46-126. Laura Collins' The Phoenix, Episode 123-192. Jason Maguire blackmails Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, Episode 193-275. The Return of the Vampire Barnabas Collins, Episode 202-220. The Kidnapping of Maggie Evans, Episode 221-261. Julia Hoffman's Attempt to Cure Barnabas, Episode 265-351. Barnabas Terrorizing Julia Hoffman, Episode 352-365. 1795, Angelique Bouchard's Vampire Curse on Barnabas, Episode 366-426. Victoria Winters unregistered trademark Witchcraft Trial, Episode 400-461. The Witchcraft Trial involving Victoria Winters is inspired by Arthur Miller unregistered trademark play The Crucible. Reverend Trask unregistered trademark Fate is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe unregistered trademark short story The Cask of Amontillado. Nathan Forbes unregistered trademark Manipulation of Millicent Collins, Episode 419-460. 1968/9, The Mystery of Jeff Clark, Episode 461-665. The Creation of Adam, Episode 466-636. The character of Adam is inspired by Mary Shelley unregistered trademark horror novel Frankenstein. The Dream Curse, Episode 477-548. Elizabeth's Fear of Being Buried Alive, Episode 513-672. This storyline is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe unregistered trademark short story The Premature Burial. Nicholas Blyer unregistered trademark Scheme to Create a Master Race, Episode 549-633/634. Chris Jennings unregistered trademark Werewolf Curse, Episode 627-700. The Ghosts of Quentin Collins and Beth Chavez haunt Linwood, episodes 639-700. The character of Quentin Collins and his role is inspired by the Peter Quintin Henry James unregistered trademark Gothic novel The Turn of the Screw. 1897, Barnabas unregistered trademark Mission to Save David Collins, episode 700-839. The Heartbeat That Tortures Quentin is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe unregistered trademark short story The Telltale Heart. Jenny Collins The Mad Woman in the Attic, episode 707-748. Jenny Collins is inspired by the character of Bertha from Charlotte Bronte unregistered trademark Gothic novel Jane Eyre. Laura Collins The Phoenix, episode 728-761. Worthington Hall and Gregory Trasker unregistered trademark running of it is inspired by Charles Dickens unregistered trademark novel Nicholas Nickleby. Magda Rakosia unregistered trademark Werewolf Curse on Quentin, episode 749-834. The Portrait of Quentin Collins is inspired by Oscar Wilde unregistered trademark Gothic novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. Gregory Trasker unregistered trademark Manipulation of Judith Collins, episode 762-884. Gregory Trasker unregistered trademark Fate is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe unregistered trademark short story The Cask of Amontillado. The Hand of Count Petofi, episode 778-814. The Hand of Count Petofi is inspired by William Frye Harvey's short story The Beast with Five Fingers. Quentina unregistered trademark Torture is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe unregistered trademark short story The Pit and the Pendulum. The Creation of Amanda Harris, episode 812-850. The theme of an artist's falling in love with his own creation who is brought to life by supernatural forces is reminiscent of the classic Greek myth of Pygmalion. Barnabas's infatuation with Kitty Soames, episode 844-885. Count Petofi body swaps with Quentin, episode 849-883. The character of Count Petofi is based on the real-world Count of Saint-Germain, a Georgian-era courtier and man of science who claimed, and possibly was, the son of Francis II Ra-Ka-Kubtxi. In the 19th century, Theosophist legends claimed that he attained the secret of immortality. 1969-70, Barnabas falls under the control of the Leviathans, episode 886-950. This storyline is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft unregistered trademark shared universe known as the Cthulhu mythos, and particularly on the short story The Dunwich Horror. The Mystery of Grant Douglas and Olivia Corey, episode 888-934. This storyline is inspired by the Greek mythological tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Chris Jennings unregistered trademark Werewolf Curse, episode 889-978. The Leviathan Child, episode 891-929. Jeb Hawkes The Leviathan Leader, episode 935-980. 1970 Parallel Time, The Death of Angela Collins, episode 969-1060. This storyline is inspired by Daphne du Maurier unregistered trademark Gothic novel Rebecca. Cyrus Longworth's Experiment, episode 978-1035. This storyline is inspired by Robert Louis Stevenson unregistered trademark Chilling Shocker short novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1995-1970-1840, The Destruction of Linwood, episode 1061-1070. The Ghosts of Gerard Stiles and Daphne Harriet haunt Linwood, episode 1071-1109. This storyline is inspired by Henry James unregistered trademark Gothic novel The Turn of the Screw. Barnabas's infatuation with Roxanne Drew, episode 1081-1150. The Head of Judah Zachary, episode 1117-1138. Judah Zachary unregistered trademark Possession of Gerard Stiles, episode 1139-1197. Quentin Colenso Unregistered Trademark S. Witchcraft Trial, Episode 1162-1197. 1841 Parallel Time, Bramwell Colenso Unregistered Trademark S. and Catherine Harrigia Unregistered Trademark S. Love Affair, Episode 1186-1245. This storyline is inspired by Emily Bronte Unregistered Trademark S. Gothic novel Wuthering Heights. The Cursed Room Lottery, Episode 1194-1245. This storyline is inspired by Shirley Jackson Unregistered Trademark S. short story The Lottery. Cast. Character names noted with indicates appearance of a counterpart in an alternate reality known as Parallel Time during episodes 969-1060 or 1186-1245. Are to the first parallel counterpart played by Mary Cooper during episodes 1206-1238. R squared played by Betsy Durkin during episodes 630-650. And Carolyn Groves during episodes 662-665. R cubed played by Diana Walker during episode 578. Are played by Mark Allen during episodes 5-22. A micron played by George Mitchell during episodes 6-16. A paragraph played by Vince O'Brien during episodes 148-174. 328 and 503-675. Angus Kens during episodes 341 and 342. And Alfred Sander during episode 615. Are played by James Hall during episodes 199-205. Are played by Richard Woods during episodes 219 and 229. And Peter Turgeon during episodes 335-362. Are to the first played by Edward Marshall during episode 669. Production, locations, both theatrical films, House of Dark Shadows and Night of Dark Shadows, were shot primarily on location at the Lyndhurst Estate in Tarrytown, New York. For the TV series, Essex, Connecticut was the locale used for the town of Collinsport. Among the locations cited there are the Collinsport Wharf, Main Street, and the Evans Cottage. The Griswold Inn in Essex was used for the Collinsport Inn, and the town post office was used for the Collinsport Police Station. The Collinwood Standard Mansion used for the TV series is the Carey Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, until August 2009 used by South Virginia University. The exteriors for the old house were filmed at Sproat Mansion, which was also located on the Lyndhurst estate. This mansion was destroyed by fire in 1969. The Lockwood Matthews Mansion in South Newark, Connecticut, was also used for some scenes in House of Dark Shadows. Some outdoors shots for the series were filmed in the famous Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, not far from the Lyndhurst Mansion. Special effects, working within the constraints of the live-to-tape format with almost every scene done in one take. Dark Shadows displayed an unusually inventive use of costume, makeup and, in particular, special effects. Both time travel and ghosts allowed characters killed in earlier sequences to return, often in period clothing. Tsar copyright entries held in the old mansion were often visited by ghostly apparitions of quivering ectoplasm. Dream sequences included colorful psychedelic spectacles superimposed over ethereal, fog-filled fantasies. Individuals of normal appearance were transformed into hideous creatures of the netherworld. Errors: the difficulty of keeping up with the demanding schedule of a daily half-hour show manifested itself on screen. In addition to sets wobbling unintentionally, heavily used actors especially Frid and Bonetto often struggled with their lines, and occasionally, a stagehand could be spotted wandering onto the back of the set. At other times, the microphone boom appeared in the frame, a television camera would appear on screen, a fly hovered around the head of an actor, or window curtains fell down. These bloopers are treasured by Dark Shadows fans and have been collected by MPI Home Video on both VHS and DVD. Music: of particular note is Robert Cobbett's inspired music score, which broke new ground for a television program. The original soundtrack cracked the top 20 of Billboard US National Albums Chart in 1969 and still ranks as one of the top-selling TV soundtracks ever. The instrumental track Quentin's Theme, for which Cobbett earned a Grammy nomination, was recorded by the Charles Randolph Green Sound. The single peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in summer 1969, when Dark Shadows was perhaps at the peak of its popularity. Ratings. Media, Home Video. MPI Home Video currently holds the home video rights to the series. All episodes were issued on VHS from 1989 through 1995. Episodes 210-1245 have been released on DVD in 26 collections from 2002 through 2006. Episodes 1-209 were released in 2007 under the title of Dark Shadows, The Beginning. On April 3, 2012, MPI re-released the 32 collections. The first collection has been released internationally, but due to generally low sales, this has been the extent of international release of the series. On April 10, 2012, MPI released a limited edition complete series box set in the shape of a coffin. The 131 DVDs are housed in 22 individual plastic cases, with the spines looking upward to show the entire body of Barnabas lying asleep in his coffin. Only 2,500 numbered copies of these were made, with each set including a limited edition card signed by original series star Jonathan Frid. A similar but unlimited deluxe edition set was subsequently released on July 10, 2012, without the limited edition card signed by Jonathan Frid and without the serial limitation number plate on the bottom of the box. Films. MGM released a feature film titled House of Dark Shadows in 1970. Dan Curtis directed it, and Sam Hall and Gordon Russell wrote the screenplay. Many cast members from the soap opera, including Jonathan Frid, Grayson Hall, Roger Davis, and Catherine Lee Scott, reprised their roles. 1971 saw the release of Night of Dark Shadows, also directed by Dan Curtis and written by Curtis and Sam Hall. Actors included David Selby, Grayson Hall, Kate Jackson, and Lara Parker, among others. Books. There have been 2 series of Dark Shadows novels. The first, released during the show's original run, were all penned by romance writer Marilyn Ross, a pseudonym for author Dan Ross, and were published by Paperback Library. Ross also wrote a novelization of the theatrical movie House of Dark Shadows. The second series of books consists of 3 novels by Lara Parker, Angelic's Descent, The Salem Branch, and Wolf Moon Rising, as well as Dreams of the Dark by horror authors Elizabeth Massey and Stephen Mark Rainey. There also have been several books about Dark Shadows, including the Dark Shadows Almanac and the Dark Shadows Companion. Magazines. During its original run, Dark Shadows was featured in many magazines, including Afternoon TV, Castle of Frankenstein, Daytime TV, and Famous Monsters of Filmland. Even after the show ended, it received coverage in genre magazines of the 1970s, like Monsters of the Movies. In 2003, a 2-part article titled Collecting Dark Shadows, Return to Collinwood, appeared in Autograph Collector magazine. It was the first major article to chronicle the show in years. In 2005, Scary Monsters magazine number 55 devoted an entire issue to Dark Shadows. Included were full-length interviews with cast members Marie Wallace, David Selby, and Catherine Lee Scott, as well as Don't Open That Coffin. A Baby Boomer's Adventures in the Land of Dark Shadows. Both the Autograph Collector and Scary Monsters articles were penned by freelance writer Rod Labb, who once ran a fan club for Dennis Patrick in 1969 €70. Labb also contributes to Fangoria magazine and is currently doing a series of full-length interviews with surviving original cast members, leading up to the release of Burton's film. Labb's interview with Jerry Lacey, who played the nefarious Reverend Trask, appeared in issue number 296. His second, with Catherine Lee Scott, was in issue number 304. The latest, a Chris Pennock profile, is scheduled to run in issue number 310. He's already interviewed Marie Wallace for a future issue, with more to come. A lengthier version of Catherine's interview can be found on her website. Comics. From March 14, 1971, to March 11, 1972, the Newspaper Enterprise Association syndicated a Dark Shadows comic strip by illustrator Kenneth Bruce Ball to dozens of newspapers across the country. In 1996, Pomegranate Press, Limited published Dark Shadows, the comic strip book, which collected the entire 52-week run of the daily and Sunday strip. Gold Key Comics released 35 issues of a regular Dark Shadows comic book, mostly written by John Warner, which ran for years after the cancellation of the series on ABC. And in 1991, Innovation Publishing released a short-lived comic book series based on the NBC TV revival show. Hermes Press has released a 5-volume archive reprint series of the Gold Key series in 2010-2011. Additionally, Dynamite Entertainment launched a new monthly series of Dark Shadows comic books in October 2011. Other media. There have also been 2 board games, a few coloring books, a jigsaw puzzle, and a Viewmaster reel. In June 2012, some Dark Shadows episodes were made available for streaming online video on Hulu and Hulu+. Episodes 211-250 were made available, covering the introduction of Barnabas Collins. Audio drama. Based on a 2003 stage play performed at a Dark Shadows convention, Return to Collinwood is an audio drama written by Jamison Selby and Jim Pearson, and starring David Selby, Catherine Lee Scott, John Carlin, Nancy Barrett, Lara Parker, Roger Davis, Marie Wallace, Christopher Pennock, Donna Wandre, James Storm, and Terry Crawford. The show is available on CD. Big Finish Productions. In 2006, Big Finish Productions continued the Dark Shadows saga with an original series of audio dramas, starring the original cast. The first season featured David Selby, Lara Parker, Catherine Lee Scott, and John Carlin. Robert Rodan, who played Adam in the original series, also appears in the 4th story, playing a new character. Barnabas Collins is played by Andrew Collins. A second series was released in 2010. In addition to the casts returning from Series 1, Kingdom of the Dead also featured Lizette Anthony, Alec Newman, Lizzie Hopley, Jerry Lacey, and David Warner. Big Finish has also produced a series of dramatic story readings based on the series, with arguably the most notable being the 2010 release The Night Whispers, in which Jonathan Frid reprised the role of Barnabas. Revivals, 1991. In 1991, MGM Television produced a short-lived primetime remake that aired on NBC from January 13 to March 22. The revival was a lavish, big-budget weekly serial combining gothic romance and stylistic horror. Although it was a huge hit at introduction, the onset of the Gulf War caused NBC to continually preempt or reschedule the episodes, resulting in declining ratings. It was cancelled after the first season. The final episode ended with a cliffhanger. Victoria Winters is learning that Barnabas Collins was a 200-year-old vampire. It also starred veterans Gene Simmons and Roy Thins, British character actress Lizette Anthony, Barbara Steele, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. 2004. Plans for another revival series have been discussed off and on since the 1991 series' demise, including a TV miniseries to wrap up the plotlines of the cancelled NBC series and a feature film, co-written by Dan Curtis and Barbara Steele, utilizing the 1991 cast. In 2004, a pilot for a new WB Network Dark Shadows series, starring Marley Shelton as Victoria Winters and Alec Newman as Barnabas Collins, was written and shot, but never picked up. The pilot has been screened at the Dark Shadows Festival conventions with Dan Curtis Productions' blessing, but has yet to surface elsewhere. This pilot was produced by Warner Brothers. Television, 2012. In 2012, Warner Brothers produced a film adaptation of the soap opera. Tim Burton directed the film, and Johnny Depp, finally realizing one of his childhood fantasies, starred as Barnabas Collins. However, the film treated the stories comedically, and was not the hoped-for major success. References, notes. Bibliography, The Dark Shadows Companion, 25th Anniversary Collection, edited by Catherine Lee Scott, foreword by Jonathan Frid, Pomegranate Press, 1990. ISBN 0-938817-25-6, Dark Shadows Almanac, edited by Catherine Lee Scott and Jim Pearson, Pomegranate Press, 1995. ISBN 0-938817-18-3, Dark Shadows, The Comic Strip Book, by Kenneth Bruce Bald, Pomegranate Press, 1996. ISBN 0-938817-39-6, Further Reading, Balsaleary, Frank. A Physics of Dark Shadows. Cultural Studies Press, 2008. ISBN 978-0-9815407-0-2, Clute, John and Grant, John. The Encyclopedia of Fantasy. St. Martin's Press, 1999. p. 823. ISBN 0-312-19869-8, Hamrick, Craig and Jamieson, R. J. Barnabas and Company, The Cast of the TV Classic Dark Shadows. iUniverse, 2012. ISBN 978-1-4759-1034-6, Jones, Stephen. The Essential Monster Movie Guide, A Century of Creature Features on Film, TV and Video. Watson Guptill, 2000. PA 99. ISBN 0-8230-7936-8, Krensky, Stephen. Vampires. Lerner Publications, 2007. PA 48. ISBN 0-8225-5891-2, Mansour, David. From ABBA to Zoom, A Pop Culture Encyclopedia of the Late 20th Century. Andrews Macmillan Publishing, 2005. PA 109. ISBN 0-7407-5118-2, McNally, Raymond T. and Florescu, Raideur in Search of Dracula, The History of Dracula and Vampires. Houghton Mifflin Books, 1994. PA 270. ISBN 0-395-65783-0, Mitchell, Charles P. The Complete H. P. Lovecraft Filmography. Greenwood Press, 2001. p. 220. ISBN 0-313-31641-4, Ricardo, Martin V. Vampires Unearthed, The Complete Multimedia Vampire and Dracula Bibliography. Garland Publishing, Incorporated, 1983. PA 19. ISBN 0-8240-9128-0, Schemering, Christopher. The Soap Opera Encyclopedia. Ballantine Books, 1985. PA 61. ISBN 0-345-32459-5, Sen, Brian and Johnson, John. Fantastic Cinema Subject Guide, a topical index to 2500 horror, science fiction, and fantasy films. McFarland and Colorado, 1992. PA 551. ISBN 0-89950-681-X, South, Malcolm. Mythical and Fabulous Creatures, A Sourcebook and Research Guide. Greenwood Press, 1987. PA 260. ISBN 0-313-24338-7, Sullivan, Jack. The Penguin Encyclopedia of Horror and the Supernatural. Viking, 1986. PA 422. ISBN 0-670-80902-0, Terence, Vincent. The Complete Encyclopedia of Television Programs, 1947 1979. A.S. Barnes and Company, 1979. Werland, Rick. The Horror Film, An Introduction. Blackwell Publishing, 2006. PA 93. ISBN 1-4051-3902-1, external links, Dark Shadows at the Internet Movie Database, Dark Shadows Revival at the Internet Movie Database, Dark Shadows at the Internet Movie Database, Dark Shadows at TV.com, Dark Shadows at TV.com, Dark Shadows Online, Dark Shadows book series listing at the Internet Speculative Fiction Database.